Screen.
Yeah, Nihar, share your screen.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Welcome. Go ahead.
Sir.
Nihar, you have to share your screen. We are seeing you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm clicking. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Now it came, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Coming. Yeah.
So, as before starting our meeting, I was saying to Bedi sir regarding the present COVID scenario, and as a vascular surgeon, we are facing a lot of our patients with acute limb ischemia post-COVID or during COVID infection. And Dr. Sekhar also presented last week nicely in a lot of patients in detail. So in this, I say my thanks to our cardiac team and our ICU team, Dr. P.C. Raj sir, and also Dr. Varsa Kiran, and our ICU team. So the story begins. A 62-year-old lady who was having 4 days history of fever and breathing difficulty, and patient was having comorbidity like diabetes mellitus of more than 22 years and hypertension, and CT thorax was cohort 5, and COVID PCR was positive. So the initial course was because of severe ARDS saturation in that room air was 80%, and type 1 respiratory failure with ratio was less than 0.1. So she required high flow pressure of ventilation to avoid intubation as much as possible, and hemodynamic and metabolic parameters were stable otherwise. After 10 days, ARDS status quo noted pain over the right lower limb, and arterial line was placed 7 days back to the right femoral artery. She was having thromboprophylactic dose of Lexan, and line was immediately removed and increased the intensity of anticoagulation. Patient was still in the COVID positive ICU side. And after 12 days, the pain was worsened. The foot drop Doppler showed no flow in the femoral and popliteal segment. But at this time, this day, when we did the Doppler, that day only she was shifted to the general ICU side because the COVID was negative. So here it was difficult to explain to the patient relatives. They are saying that our mother is supposed to go home. We are thinking that she is now COVID negative. And okay, a patient is in ICU for the chest problem and respiratory problem. But we never knew that patient, my mother is going to lose leg. So the question to ask, why did she develop arterial thrombosis? How to manage it now? How to prevent in future? So because to answer the questions of the relatives. So back to our patient, the present stage was 2B. So we are thinking that whether straight away I should go for thromboembolectomy. So before that, how to do an angiogram. But thing is, based on the severity of acute limb ischemia, so we are thinking whether we should do a CT peripheral angiogram or DSA straightway. But thing was because to shift for CT was patient was condition was not good, and so we thought why not to do DSA subsequently, because if necessary any thrombosuction or thrombolysis we can do. So therapeutic also we can do simultaneously. So presumed to be local thrombosis because there was past history of puncture to the right femoral artery. So because as I told, the patient was too sick to be shifted to for a CT scan, hence the extent of thrombus could not be sure, and probably prohibitively high risk of general anesthesia in view of severe ARDS, and already initiated on anticoagulation, hence considered to risk for spinal anesthesia. So option for catheter guided procedure was there. So diagnostic followed by therapeutic. So for that we plan to do digital subtraction angiogram. So initial procedure you can see here. So from the external iliac level till below, again it was mildly visible to the mid SFA and partial distal SFA. Then distally nothing was visible. So then plan for catheter-directed thrombolysis. So we did, and the next day we found this is the situation. So then our plan was what to do next. So plan was for catheter-directed thrombolysis. Followed by the catheter-directed thrombolysis through removal of the thrombus by penumbra system. So by that time we had already got the penumbra system, and we did thrombosuction through the penumbra system, and this was our initial. So initial, when we could not open the profunda, then subsequently we could open the profunda. You can see here almost major portion of thrombosuction done, and subsequently post-op care we gave heparin infusion, continued targeting for APTT more than 50, mannitol and steroid given for to reperfusion injury, expecting that, and analgesia and 2 units of blood transfusion we gave. So 48 hours after, you can see the dorsalis pedis artery flow was good, and as well as posttibial artery, and we could feel the pulse also. And the patient symptomatically was better. The limb was warm, and she could partial neuritic pain, tingling sensation was there, and patient could be able to stand, but still the lungs was not good. So positive pressure oxygen therapy was continuing, and in the 48 hours. Then subsequently, patient leg problem got over, but the problem was with the lungs, and which she could not be recovered from the lungs problem. So the learning point here is COVID-induced hypercoagulable state results in varied spectrum of thrombotic complications, and catheter-directed intervention for threatened limb is safe in patient unacceptable high anesthesia risk, and where we cannot do surgical removal completely. And adjuvant thrombolytic therapy prior to mechanical thrombectomy improves the chance of success. And most importantly, adequate precautions with the necessary PPE to be all procedure in cath lab whenever we are doing any patients, because nowadays lot of patients, though they are negative, but they are asymptomatic, and later we found out they are positive. So we have to be careful whenever we are doing any procedure in the endovascular as well as open surgery. And the most important is from the beginning we used to tell our students, and we have learned from our teachers, that good counseling to the patients, what are the possible outcomes, because still the patients were happy and unhappy because they had to lose their patient because of pulmonary condition, and but they are happy that the doctors gave the maximum benefit possible whenever the problem came. Thank you, and I am happy for all the questions and discussion.
It was an excellent presentation you made, and I think there would be a few questions.
Yes.
Yeah, you did a good job of clearing the thrombus, but I thought the profunda still had some residual thrombus. Am I right, or was it?
No, in the subsequent, in the same, initially it was some thrombus was there, but we could suck that out before completion.
Yeah, because that is, I think, the most important part, that, you know, we always need to preserve the profunda, because your first day angios and all were not showing any profunda. But subsequently, I think Penumbra did a very good magic out there in terms of removing that clot, and a lot of the clot came out. But I saw your last image, so that's why I thought that there was some distal thrombus in the profunda. So I just wondered.
Yeah, actually, after that, again, we tried to remove and we cleared it. And in 48 hours, if you saw the Doppler report, Doppler findings, nice it was, and pulses were palpable, both dorsalis pedis and posttibial.
Great.
Excellent save. You know, why not do a mechanical thromboaspiration first, and then if there's any residual thrombus, in spite of your multiple passes, lytics can be used.
Sir, there was the three things. One was to convince the relatives that we want some intervention. And second was patients were not so much cooperative, even if with positive pressure oxygen, she was moving on the table. So we thought, and it was this time, it was evening. And by the time we got the penumbra, the company guy told that it will take minimum 3 to 4 hours. So I thought, why now? We'll see that how is our thrombolysis is helping. And, and always there was a question in my brain that whether there is something because of our arterial line when it was there during ICU. That question I was getting from ICU guys and also sometimes the patient relatives. Then I was trying to explain them that you see why the entire limb will get thrombus because of hypercoagulable state through the COVID patients.
Two questions which I have.
What were the D-dimer levels?
Yeah, D-dimer levels was at 1200, sir.
So just two short questions. One, did you use a separator along with the penumbra? And secondly, did you find the clot? Because last week we discussed about this part, that the clot that we are seeing in COVID patients is something like a jelly-like, gelatinous-like clot which is there. So did you suck out something like that also?
Yes, sir. So that I have not shown you. We could keep in our small gauze piece, and we could keep in that. It was a little bit jelly-like, as you are saying, correct?
Right. And did you use a separator also in this one, or you used only the penumbra without the separator?
No, we had to use the separator. We did not have the separator, so we used that.
All right.
The thrombus in COVID is slightly different.
Yes, sir.
It is some of them. If you see the starting point of the problem, it's very hard.
Yes.
It's almost like a compacted stuff. Then you have a tail clot.
Yes.
So,
And
that is why
in this literature search, sir.
Thrombolytic therapy doesn't work very well.
Yes.
Because that hard one doesn't dissolve.
Yes.
Here, see, because you had a femoral line, I think that was the initiating point more than the COVID.
Yes.
That was the initiating point. That's why you got a better result in this case.
Sir.
Otherwise, thrombolytic therapy, it's not very satisfactory.
No, that I'm saying in our case also thrombolysis we could not get much result. So for that only next day morning we had to go for the penumbra, sir. Overnight, yes, sir.
Well, one question which I wanted to ask you, you were mentioning about spinal anesthesia.
No, sir. Actually, when I was planning for whether, because in ICU, patient with critical limb ischemia, immediately to shift to OT and thromboembolectomy. So thing is, as per the history, it was not, though patient was 22 years of history of 62 age, 22 years history of diabetes, but the thrombus is not from the coronary, so from the heart. So it is not cardiogenic thrombus. So that I had to explain that even if I try to do thromboembolectomy, I may not be able to remove completely. So I told that better to do thrombolysis followed by, if necessary, thrombosuction. So, and another thing was, anesthetists were highly unhappy that they told that we have to give a GA. And patient relatives are not ready to do neither patient relatives nor pulmonologist or ICU doctor. They're not happy. They told the last 2 weeks we are managing without intubating. And once you will intubate, she is not going to come back because lungs is not good. Saturation.
No, but was it done under anesthesia or just local?
Local, sir. We could manage with local.
Local, yeah. That's what.
Yes.
Right.
Right. Ganesh, I think we go to the third case now.
Yeah, we go to third case.
Thank
And
you, sir.
If the
Thank you.
chairperson will allow, I'll just make
Vijay.
an announcement that tomorrow we have a boot camp on troubleshooting for aortic aneurysm by no less than Professor George Joseph. And we expect you all, because George is really going to give us a fantastic talk about how to get into treating aneurysms and how to bail yourself out in case of any problem. So we will look for to having you all for this wonderful session tomorrow evening at the same time. So back again.
Great.
Thank you, sir.
So now it's TVAR during lockdown. Vijay, let's have the chairperson in. Over to Vijay.
Yeah. Okay, am I audible? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Once again, good evening to everybody. This was a case we treated during COVID times. little bit challenges. There were many challenges. The first was to begin with the diagnosis, that what am I treating? Is it a dissection or an aneurysm or a pseudocoarctation or what? Once you see the pictures, you will get an idea what. Yes. So this was a case history of a patient, elderly gentleman, 77-year-old. He presented to a physician with a sudden onset of backache and abdominal pain following fall at home. So probably they thought initially it could be because of some injury and some hematoma. He had these following risk factors, like he is diabetic. He underwent CABG 15 years ago with AVR, hypertensive, and history of right-sided posterior circulation stroke. This was a very important history when we involved a neurologist in the treatment. And he was an uncle of a physician, and he was admitted to a physician's hospital. So with these risk factors, history of pain, history of fall, they thought of a local pathology, and that was correct. On a sonography, they found that the right renal subcapsular and a perinephric hematoma, large hematoma, reasonably large. But at the same time, he was on a warfarin in view of AVR, and INR was 7. So it was very explanatory that because of raised INR, the hematoma and pain, etc. They further got CT scan abdomen done, which confirmed the ultrasound findings and revealed the same hematoma. At the same time, CT scan abdomen also showed there's a large aortic aneurysm. And because of that CT finding, probably they got a CT angiogram done. I'll show the picture in the next slide. And echocardiography was reasonably okay with a good LV function and all the findings of AVR. So because of the CT angiography, he was referred to us. Now the CT angiography, you see, as little unusual finding. When I saw this picture, he came with a different scan center. One thing I thought, this is left vertebral artery arising from aortic arch. Unusual variation, aberrant variation, though literature says it is seen among between 3 to 8% of people. So this was one anatomic challenge. Two, there was a post-subclavian stenosis or coarctation. Why I wouldn't say coarctation, because at this age, and there were not many collaterals though. So pseudocoarctation, the large dilatation. And third, you can see this sort kind of a small and a short length false lumen, which was probably a kind of an intimal calcification. So this must be an old one. So, and when you look at this picture, no, unlike unusual of true and false lumen location, this time the true lumen was on the lateral and outer aspect, unlike normally we see in dissection on the medial aspect. So these were the CT findings. So this was the only, these were the challenges while treating this. This is a false lumen, you see, the true lumen here. And it was extending, going right up to celiac trunk. Now, so to treat this, there were challenges like, as I said, unusual pathology. I didn't know, was it a pseudocoarctation or type B dissection or probably an aneurysm, degenerative disease. Left vertebral artery was arising from aortic arch. All these great vessel osteas are very close, by 2 or 3 millimeters away from each other. Left common carotid, vertebral and subclavian artery. So, and the arch. So the plan was to do hybrid revascularization and deploy a graft. The issue was how to revascularize left vertebral artery. Especially when there's a history of right vertebral artery occlusion. You know, there is a history of previous stroke. And the challenge, this was not a challenge though, to revascularize left subclavian artery. The other technical challenge was the CT angio reported post subclavian artery aortic diameter was around 7 to 8 millimeter, which was smaller than the device I was going to use. And of course the cost, because right from subclavian to celiac, so 2 devices. And during the whole hospitalization time, his INR was 7, his blood pressure was 190, he was on anti-G infusion. We had to stop warfarin, gave vitamin K, FFP, and bring INR down with LMWH coverage. So it took few days. Other challenges were the cost of treatment, 2 devices versus benefit of treatment, because it was, so to say, incidentally diagnosed when he had a history of fall, backache, pain, etc. And the risk of procedure, especially with the left vertebral artery occlusion and infarct and another posterior circulation stroke. And what is the benefit of treatment? You know, we do not know. This pathology could be there for quite some time. They thought about sending him to Dr. Bedi's center. Because of COVID times, it was difficult to transfer him there, and limitations of hardware, with Bombay being close to us, but we are not getting the desired limitations. With all these challenges, I thought we'll have to do him. They agreed for whatever the risk, benefit, cost we had discussed with them. The plan was to do right femoral open access, left percutaneous CFA access, to right common femoral. You know, it was easy to, of course, navigate this Terumo guide wire over the H1 catheter, which was replaced with Lunder-Kust wire in the ascending aorta. When the left CFA, I tried passing a pictal catheter. No, it was that whole pictal head was not going easily across the post subclavian stenotic area. So that means there was some kind of narrowing. And while discussing this case with the colleague and with the industry guys, the challenge was if we cannot pull the device up, what to do? So that was another challenge. The two major challenges: left vertebral artery and post SCA aortic diameter. And to my surprise, I was so happy when I did this angiogram. I was so happy because left vertebral artery was arising from left CCA, not actually from aortic arch. So at this, just before that, we had involved a neurophysician who had treated him for a right-sided posterior circulation stroke. He said that if you cannot revascularize left vertebral artery, you cannot proceed with the case. And we were not able to somehow do reimplantation or revascularize left vertebral artery surgically. So I thought, let's do an angio. We'll somehow see what we can do. But this finding gave me a lot of solace that left vertebral is arising from CCA. So I still have some kind of a landing space, though very few millimeters. The anatomy was a blessing in disguise though. So with this, we could proceed. You can see the same angiogram. Now the other challenge was the smaller aortic diameter. The profile of the device was probably 7 or 8 or 9 millimeter, and the aortic diameter was smaller than that. So we had a backup that from the other device we can dilate with this balloon, create a space, and then carry the device high up. Luckily, I didn't have to do that, though it was planned. With the other left access, we had crossed the wire and we were there if required to put a balloon. But luckily, device went up easily without much difficulties. And you have seen the first picture. You see the second image now. So this is a false lumen going right up to celiac trunk. So these two challenges, which I thought while planning the case, that left vertebral artery origin and a small aortic diameter, both were easily managed while doing the case. So you see this now, then it was easy. Then I changed my plan. I was not worried about left vertebral artery. The issue was left subclavian to revascularize or not. Since it was not vertebral was not arising from subclavian, I had liberty to not to revascularize left subclavian and go ahead cover the subclavian artery, which I did. I covered the subclavian artery. I thought if it becomes symptomatic, probably I might do carotid subclavian bypass. So the stent was deployed, and there was another challenge which I didn't expect, which some experienced operators like Dr. Bedi, GJ, Ajay, Tarun, they must have anticipated. This was the challenge I saw, that after deployment the device, while taking out the device, the nose cone got stuck. And you can make out, if you try to pull it, the whole endograft is coming back. My heart was, can you imagine my situation at that point of time, you know? We were just clueless. I was cursing myself, had I dilated this aorta, this job would have been much easy. And Sumit was with me. I was wondering what to do. We were really clueless, do left, right, look here and there. There was no, but somehow with some movements, I could pull it up. The whole thing was retrieved back into the seat, and then after the case was fairly simple. And this what you can see is the end result. Now this is a blessing in disguise. The next slide. The other challenge to me was there was still some flow in the false lumen, which could be probably because of some re-entry, but I was not worried about it though. And you see this side. So after this, it reasonably looked okay. The false lumen did fill up so well. And this, when you see this, it's a blessing in disguise, the stenosis. Because I didn't dilate, the stenosis is there. So stent migration, though not a very good landing, but stent migration would definitely be much less in view of that narrowed aortic stenosis. So these are the final pictures of the case, and he did pretty well. Post-operative, he behaved very nicely. Left subclavian didn't require any revascularization. His blood pressure difference was significant. There was transient rise in creatinine, which settled down without any intervention, and he went home uneventfully. And in follow-up also, he came after a month. He's fairly doing okay. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Over to the moderators.
Yeah.
Vijay, what was the size of the aneurysm and what was the size of false lumen?
Yes, then as you can see in the picture, the total diameter was 5.4. The false 1 centimeter.
So my question was, see, this guy had a fall and a perinephric hematoma with INR of 7, and this probably the CT angio was an incidental finding. So why did you think of fixing the aneurysm then and not for the hematoma to settle and then do it later?
See, hematoma, agree. Hematoma actually didn't require any treatment, Dhanesh.
Yeah, agreed. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So why did you think of fixing this?
Correct. That's what my slide said, the cost versus benefit versus risk. There was a time in view of vertebral origin, these technical challenges, we decided not to do anything and send him home. But the scare in the physicians, in the family of rupture, somebody told them that this might rupture and he'll be dead. So that scare probably they were not able to take that risk.
I think if I
Vijay,
can just add on a couple of points, Vijay bhai.
Yeah.
One is, of course, that previously we used to think that if the false lumen is more than 22 millimeters, then only it should be fixed.
27.
22 millimeters.
22.
False lumen diameter of 22 millimeters. So now that is practically out of the window. And today what has been found is that anytime the false lumen starts increasing, you should fix it up, because all these patients do tend to come back, and then if our follow-up is not very diligent with these patients, you keep them on to medical management, some of them will definitely rupture. So I think that's one thing which is there. If you can fix them relatively easier, that's again a very good idea. Two things which I can say that today, next week we are going to present. My friend Dr. Yashpal just did one case. We did one case with him last week with a similar thing that you're talking about of a left vertebral artery. And in that particular patient with a type B aneurysm, he did a carotid subclavian bypass. Along with that, he did the vertebral also bypass at the same time. And he's done a wonderful job. Next week, when you look at the cases that he's going to show, it was done beautifully. Another point which I would make regarding this nose cone getting stuck, this happens very, very frequently. The moment you have a tortuous anatomy, Vijay bhai, you have this problem. So what we do many a times, one of the bailouts is take out the stiff wire. We just had this last week also. Very tortuous aneurysm that we were doing. I think Yashpal would remember. We just took out the wire and we replaced it with a Terumo wire, or even if we are taking a Lundquist wire, you just bring the soft end of the Lundquist right into the tip of the nose cone. So what happens is, the moment that happens, the nose cone basically becomes a little straighter, because otherwise the wire tends to give it a shape memory. So we do that routinely, and yeah, the last week also case we had absolutely the same problem, and it was just not happening. Ajay and me, we were doing this case in our cath lab in a tortuous aneurysm, which we would, I think, which we will show in an aortic aneurysm, and there were two double bends out there, and that is where the same problem happened. And then after that, we just took across a wire with a Terumo. One part Ajay managed to pull down. Then after that, the second part which was there, gently with a Terumo, And then again with a stiff wire again, then we managed to pull out the second one. So this is something which happens very, very commonly.
Vijay, I have something to say. That perinephric hematoma which was there, that probably was not related to the aneurysm.
No.
Because the picture which you showed was more in the thoracic part. So the main story was fall and perinephric hematoma due to high INR, and that was the first thing which was needing an attention. And this incidental finding of the aneurysm, I just wonder whether the priority shifted from that perinephric hematoma to fixing the aneurysm, and what happened to the perinephric hematoma after you did all this. And then there is another question from Rahul Kumar. He thinks, he has written this way: I think the stent was deployed in true false and not true. What other moderators think? I think Vijay, you are the best person to answer that too.
I some point of time when I saw a false lumen filling, no, I thought it could be like that. But when we I came back, repositioned the pigtail catheter, then I realized it was not so. Here in this case, true lumen was much bigger than a false lumen. The way we went in with the pigtail up to this narrow segment, you know, and we were like injecting and going up. So we knew that we are into the true lumen all the time. But one point of time when I saw both lumen filling up, I also thought like Rahul that it could be true, false, true. It was not so.
Vijay, my concern, see, you obviously brought down the INR in a subtherapeutic level before you did this procedure. But during the procedure, you must have given heparin as well. And with that recent, the hematoma with heparin, obviously there was a risk of that hematoma increase worsening as well.
Dhanesh, we are keeping an eye through a sonography. We did sonography before doing this procedure also. That hematoma was not expanding. It was in fact retracting. And on discharge also we got his plain CT done, which did show that hematoma was regressing. So that was taken care of before treating this aortic part. Now I have a question, Dr. Bedi. If we have to revascularize left vertebral artery, how do we do that?
Well, the trick is that next week Yashpal is going to present this case, exactly what you are describing.
Okay.
You will get your answer out there.
No,
I will
Dr. Bedi, I want you to answer one question. How is this patient left subclavian or left upper limb is perfused? Now that see the left vertebral artery is coming up from the left carotid artery, common carotid artery.
Yeah, that is not covered now. So the left flow from the left side is retrograde from the left side. From the circle of Willis, it is coming down.
Yeah, so, but the left vertebral artery is coming up from the left common carotid. No, but yeah, how so is
he's
that?
Not covered the left common carotid, no? His common
carotid is not covered.
That's what usually the left vertebral artery comes up from the left subclavian. So how is the left
from the left subclavian? That's what he showed.
Sir, can I answer that question? The Ajay said, actually, a lot of anastomosis from the external carotid going into the thyrocervical trunk and the subclavian artery.
Yeah, that is the answer.
Yeah,
so it is usually the anastomosis. Yes. So the blood supply is coming from the shoulder, from the cervical spine, from the thoracic, and the intercostal arteries, which are sort of anastomosing and reforming the subclavian. And I think
because even intercostal arteries are covered with a graft. So I think it must be from the external carotid branches or something like that, because it is something surprising to me that the left vertebral is.
I still feel that it was probably a bovine, semi-bovine kind of an arch, because when he showed the CT angio cuts, the left vertebral was showing separately. Am I right, Vijay bhai?
Yes, true.
No,
so many a times it depends on your angulation which is there, that you are thinking that it is originating from the left subclavian, but it is not. And you rely much more on the CT angio axial cuts rather than the imaging cuts, which are reconstructions, because reconstructions can mislead you many a times. So I think that's something which is very important. And there we saw very clearly, and if I can request Vijay to show us again the CT angio, if he can show the axial cuts.
Varinder, there's a question that since patient had a CABG in the past, was the Lima graft used? So if you cover the left subclavian, obviously that would get compromised.
Absolutely. So I think we didn't see any clips of the Lima graft here. So I'll let Vijay answer that.
We did a coronary angiogram before doing the procedures, and unfortunately the grafts were occluded.
Okay.
Okay, anyway, Vijay, I want to see that completion angio again, but I thought
Sure.
the left subclavian is refilling directly.
Yeah, it is filling, not directly, but it is filling.
Did you consider putting in a plug out there?
Through filling through what?
What Ajay said, no, all those. 1 second, I am not able to go back.
Just click on that and then you will be able to go back.
Just wanted your last DSA picture to, we want to see that.
Yeah, I'll just show you in a minute.
Very interesting to know this. This is something surprising to me. That's why.
Yeah. Now you can just click on that slide.
Yeah.
And Vijay, if you could show us the CT angio, the beginning of the first CT angio that you showed.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Not this, not this.
Yeah.
See, in false lumen will always be opacified. That is not a worry at all.
This is what
That's
Dr.
a type 1B.
Dr.
So it
Sekhar,
fills
what
up-
you said, right?
It fills up much later.
Yeah,
Let's
next
show
one.
you Better picture.
Yeah.
See the marks.
So
See, this is,
you have covered the left subclavian.
yeah.
You're just beyond that.
Correct.
The fabric is just about a millimeter or so beyond the marker which is there.
Correct.
See, this is the point I wanted to raise.
No,
When
but
you
the
see
left
the
left
subclavian
vertebral.
is filling simultaneously.
No, but if you stop out there, Vijay, just stop.
Yeah.
Okay, here.
Yeah,
So
it is
now
filling
here what you're
simultaneously.
seeing, no, stop there only. When we just come there.
Yeah, go step by step.
Yeah. So just play it and then stop it at the same time.
You see this here?
You can stop here also. That's fine.
These are the
So
markers.
here your device, you are basically your left subclavian is covered in this angle,
Yes.
as well as what we look at is all the 8 markers. Now all your 8 markers are again in one line, which indicates that your graft is not really at an angle and all that. So that's number one thing. The number two thing is, I think what I see on this side is in the middle is the vertebral artery, which is arising from the left carotid, or it's probably from there's an overlapping from the bovine arch. So
No,
that is the one which is probably
That is the
feeding.
vertebral artery. That is the
Yeah.
vertebral artery. Yeah.
That's a vertebral.
Yeah, but you are already started seeing the subclavian.
Yeah, but subclavians are, there is some bit of a, because these are when you take the initial cuts, there is a fabric porosity which is there. So that's why we generally prefer to take a run after about 10 minutes or so that the fabric porosity goes off, and then you're able to see that much better, because the device is also, here in this case, you're not ballooning the device. So the device is not totally, stuck to the wall. It takes a few minutes. So generally what we do is we take a delayed shot after about 10 minutes or so, and then see how things are. And the second point is here that this is a type B dissection, and what you're seeing is that there's no opacification of the false lumen out here at this stage. So that's why when you go down, what we generally do is we take a pigtail inside the endograft and then take a shot, and generally you're able to find a type 1B endoleak out here, which is basically because of the communication.
No, and I agree that in this case, because it's a dissection, it does not
Yeah.
really matter. But if it had been an aneurysm, it
Yeah.
would have been a problem.
So I would have definitely put in a plug in this particular patient. That is the only thing I wanted to ask Vijay. Did you consider putting in a plug? Because I think that's something again which would be required in many of these patients.
Yes. Had it been, there were two things here.
Yeah.
Had it been an aneurysmal disease, a large one, where I would have thought about stent device migration, or
No, migration is not a worry at all, Vijay bhai.
or
Migration,
type
stent
type
doesn't get migrated.
Yeah, or type 1 leak, probably I would have, the plan would have been open carotid subclavian revac and ligate the artery proximal to the graft. That was the plan.
Right. So I think in this lower reconstruction we can see, but I would want him to go back again and show us the proximal part in the ascending aorta where the arch vessels are taking off. Vijay bhai, if you could just go back.
This is the one.
No, the arch angiogram.
This
This
is
you are going down now.
Oh, yes. This one.
No, this of course is
CT
your,
angio.
I would want to see the CT angio because here you can have, you are having some bit of overlapping out here.
Actually, the
This
CT
one.
angiogram, the vertebral is arising from the common carotid only. Left
It is arising from the carotid. That's what I was
carotid only,
feeling.
yeah.
Actually, unfortunately, what has happened is in this one, you are not seeing the arch
It's
vessels.
rotated.
I would want to see
Rotated
from the
image.
neck downwards. If you see from the neck downwards, probably this image you are not seeing in that one. So, but when you look at the second image, the reconstruction, it is quite obvious. And that matches with the clinical picture that when he has taken the angio, that the left vertebral is arising either from the left carotid or it's arising very close to the left carotid.
Vijay sir, can you hear?
Yeah.
Yeah, go.
Yes, sir.
Should we go
Agree
to the third case now? The
Go to
last
the third
case?
case.
Yeah, none, the last case, last one. I think Sandeep is ready.
Yes, sir.
Okay, over to Sandeep.
Oh, thank you, sir. Dr. Nikhil, are you ready? Good evening, everybody. Okay, so today we are presenting a case where the actual procedure that took around half an hour, but the mishap what we had because of the hardware, it took more than 2 hours to bail out. So this was a uterine artery embolization. Next, please, Nikhil. So this was a 34 years female young lady with the G4, P1, L1 and A2 history, a spontaneous abortion in 2011 and 2012 with the previous cesarean section in 2013, and she came to the hospital within 19 weeks plus 5 days pregnancy with the complaint of the bleeding PV, 2 episodes for last 15 days. Next, please. And when the ultrasound was done, what they found, it was a placenta previa. And apart from that, there were the multiple fibroids. And what the most important, why the patient was sent to the Gangaram hospital, it was there were multiple fetal abnormalities. The posterior fossa malformation, the small cerebellum, and the absent wormus. So, but the gynecologist, they decided, see, this is the routine protocol in our hospital. If the gynecologist in their case, they anticipate that there will be a too much bleeding during the procedure, they refer the case for the uterine artery embolization. And if during the procedure or during the surgery, they find that there is a torrential bleeding, they call us, we go to the operation theater and we ligate the bilateral internal iliac artery. So this patient was posted for the uterine artery embolization through the right femoral, common femoral artery, percutaneous approach, followed by what they planned next day, hysterectomy to evacuate the product of the conception and the myometry. Next, please. So it was a routine procedure. Routinely, we do only one puncture on one side and the both artery, both side the internal iliac uterine artery embolization we do from the one side. So what we did in this case, we punctured the right side with the 5 French sheath and we gave the 1000 units of the heparin because the patient was already bleeding, and took our routine RUC catheter. Earlier the RUC catheter were, can you stop please Nikhil here? Earlier the RUC catheters were being supplied by the Cook company, but now they have withdrawn from the market and now it is supplied by the Merit company, which is definitely inferior in the low quality performance that everybody in the department we have discussed and realized. But we don't have any option because we need some catheter which has a curve which can negotiate the aortic bifurcation so that we can do bilateral with the one puncture only. So we put this RUC catheter from the right side. We went into the left internal. We went into the left internal iliac artery and then we did up to the nidus. Play, please. Nikhil, can you play, please? And no. Back, please. And we did the left side embolization using the largest PVA particle, that is 700 to 1000 size. When you are putting the exclusion or the embolizing agent, everybody in the team keeping the eye only on the tip of the catheter, and the purpose is just to put the embolizing agent forward. It should not come backward, or there should not be any reflux. So that is the purpose. So fortunately, when we have done the procedure on the left side, and when we were pulling the catheter for the right side, we were pushing the catheter into the aorta to make into the left external iliac artery. What we found and what we see on the screen, that it was broken from the curve. Now, what to do? Rescue option and the risk. So I think we will discuss all these things when we will do the discussion at the end. At this point of the time, after the case, when I thought that all the embolizing agent we have put into the left internal iliac artery, suppose everything, whatever you are putting, the PVA or the sponge stone or the glue, if suppose that has been given from the broken tip, so you have given everything into the bilateral to common iliac, and it has gone into the down below and caused the trash foot. A young lady coming for the uterine artery embolization, and you are sending this patient with all this distal embolization. So anyway, that was our luck, and now we tried to remove this very broken piece of the catheter. We did not want to give the second puncture. We did not want to do any groin incision or any arteriotomy, or we did not want to puncture any brachial artery. So first we thought that we can catch it with the snare, and we put our Balkan sheath, so we can get some strength, I think, or some support to hold the tip of the catheter. So that took our more than half an hour, but it was never caught. And then with the help of Dr. Bedi, then we could pull this catheter, broken piece of the catheter, into the aorta with the help of the balloons. So you can see now the tip of the catheter, it is coming into the distal part of the aorta with the snugly fitted balloon, 8 mm balloon to pull the back catheter in the aorta. And when this part came here, then we snared the catheter. That was also not easy because it was such a big lumen of the aorta, big lumen of the common iliac artery. And after, I think, more than half an hour or maybe 45 minutes, we could catch it. Now, another catch was here, or other challenge was here, that we had to remove whole system, and then we had to puncture again on the right side. But fortunately, the catheter and the snare came through the 7 French Balkan sheath. Then we put the new RUC, and we could complete our right side of the procedure. So the learning was mishap can happen anytime, anywhere, but salvaging the situation holds very important. These were the hardwares which were used during the procedure. Patient was started on low molecular weight heparin. But because we had given the only 1000 units of the heparin before the procedure, so just after the procedure, what we found that the there was no femoral pulse on the right side from where we punctured and we have put the sheath. So immediately on the table, we did the small arteriotomy, transfer arteriotomy, removed the thrombus, closed it, shifted the patient with the palpable pulses. Next day, they did the hysterotomy. Next day, and after 3 days, the patient was discharged from the hospital. Thank you very much. Over to the chairpersons.
Sandeep sir, Manish here.
Yes, Manish.
Welcome. Sir, I was present during this case and it was really very, very well managed with the patients and
yes,
lot of...
I remember you were there to give us the moral support.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And it was a very well managed case.
Thank you. Thank you, Manish.
Good evening. This is Ambarish. If I can just come in to make a couple of comments. You know, this catheter that we've been using off late in uterine embolizations is the Merit catheter, and it's given us tremendous trouble. It's an extremely unwieldy catheter. We used to use the Cook's Roberts uterine catheter, which used to work very beautifully, but for some strange reason they've discontinued it. They're saying that the tip would malfunction and break off. We never experienced that problem. But I think it's just to state that all of us must start or at least explore the option of doing a transradial uterine artery embolization. I think the patient can be sent home the same day if there isn't enough, if much pain. But it's just not worth the trouble, because we're getting, you know, just the other day I was doing a uterine embolization and the catheter twisted, you know, and it refused to untwist. It's an extremely...
I remember.
So, that was also, I think, when we were doing this live. So I think it's just worth exploring the option of doing a transradial.
Fantastic. But you were quite lucky, Satvik, that was at the end of the procedure. So otherwise, you had to remove it, and again you have to put some RUC.
Yeah, you know, I think if you're using PVA, you need a 125 centimeter catheter to get into the uterines. It's not a problem. You know, if it's a particularly tall patient, then perhaps you can use a CXI, you know, 3.5 CXI to get in and do the embolizations. And we must really start exploring a transradial option.
Either the transradial or transbrachial.
Brachial, again, you know, the complications of brachial. If you,
I think your idea is very good, Amrish, because you just need a 4 French access actually. You don't need a larger access in this case, because you just need to get a catheter out there and you know, push in the particles out there. I think probably it's a much better idea to go in from the radial and do this, because you have minimum complications, and you have this new sheath that we've got, in fact, with the Hero sheath, which is there, which is again very good sheath. It's a very robust sheath which is there, and the puncture size is just about you know, hardly just a few millimeters. So I think that's a very good idea. I think we should probably, you are the expert, so probably next week we'll see you.
Yes, what we will do, the uterine artery, we will do through the radial.
Sandeep sir.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Yeah,
please.
I just want to ask one thing, because do you have any reference to temporary balloon occlusion of the aorta for this type of situation rather than embolizing the uterine artery? Because in our place, we temporarily occlude the aorta for some time when they do the cesarean, and then after that deflate the balloon. And it has seen, we have got good results with that also. Any experience with that? Rather than embolizing, just occlude the balloon in the aorta for some time. And once the cesarean is done and the baby is out, then when the bleeding is not there, so it just helped in number of occasions for us.
No, I don't think so. We have done that.
So you were saying soft compliant balloon in this case?
Yeah, so some balloons they just ask us to occlude the aorta for some time when the section is being done, and after.
Sunil, which balloon would you use? Because you would have to have a balloon which is at least about 20 millimeters balloon. So
yeah,
remove the aorta completely. And that you will have to put in a large sheath out there for getting that 20 millimeter balloon. So because either use a compliant balloon which requires a minimum 12 French. So the hole is much bigger than that. So That's one thing. And Ajay was saying something. Amrish, you were saying something.
Sir, can I just make a small comment here? The easier option that we found was do a bilateral the bilateral groin punchers, 6 French sheath, and put a 8 millimeter balloon into the common iliacs and occlude the iliacs. We thought that's an easy option, but there are two problems here. One, obviously, with a massive bleeding happening in placenta previa and all the accretas, you can't give heparin. And if you don't give heparin, and even if you occlude the iliacs for 5 minutes while they are taking control of the bleeding and the uterus and everything, there's a very high chance both the iliacs would get thrombosed. And the same problem would apply even to aortic occlusion. And once you get into thrombosis, you're in a tailspin because then you're doing an embolectomy. You will need heparin. At the same time, the patient is bleeding. So I think it's too much of confusion and chaos going on.
And
Sandeep's case has definitely shown us that also. Sandeep's case has shown us very clearly that if you use too little heparin, then in that case you are having thrombosis. If you use too much of heparin, then you have excessive bleeding. So I think both the issues are there.
If I'm just allowed to make a comment, sir, Ambarish, hi. Just to answer your question, I think we are confusing two issues here. If you're dealing with placenta previa, then and you're dealing with a patient who's undergoing a cesarean, the abdomen is open, the internal iliacs are in front of you. Just sling and loop the internal iliacs and temporarily occlude them, or if required, ligate them. I don't think an arterial puncture in this case would be appropriate. First, and secondly, I think one has to be sure about what you're dealing with, because most cases of postpartum hemorrhage could also be on account of venous bleed from the placental venous sinuses. And no amount of internal iliac occlusion or ligation or embolization is going to help there. So in which case, if it's a refractory bleed on account of placental venous sinuses, the only thing that might work is an emergency hysterectomy. But I'd say that placenta previa, cesarean underway, the best option is an bilateral internal iliac temporary or occlusion with slings, elastic loops, or ligation. I don't think arterial puncture is a good option in such cases.
Yes,
absolutely. I agree with you, Amrish. And I think if Dr. Sandeep might remember a case which was done, I think, donkey years back, 2003 or 4, where a lady had a bilateral iliac balloon occlusion done. I don't know why, and she thrombosed completely and had to undergo an embolectomy on table for bilateral.
And Ajay, we used to do it without the imaging, because in the OT we don't have any imaging.
Absolutely.
We were just by the
absolutely, sir.
Yes, we were keeping our balloon in the iliacs, common iliac or external iliac, where it is and how much we are inflating, we don't know.
Absolutely. I think we stopped doing that and we are very, very comfortable doing internal iliac temporary occlusions or permanent occlusions.
This is Dr. Rajarajan. Just to add a point of the discussion. See, instead of putting a balloon in the common iliac, we have done 1 hour before the procedure or surgery for the cesarean for placenta previa or the anticipated one, bilateral internal iliac artery balloon occlusion temporarily, and then ask the gynecologist or physician to do the cesarean, and then release the balloon later. See, if you put the balloon in the common iliac artery, then the risk of, or it's very impossible to put the aortic balloon also. So there are a lot of reports are there, bilateral internal iliac artery balloon occlusion temporarily, 1 hour before the procedure.
Okay.
With the baby inside.
Very important. Yeah. But it is very difficult, as Dr. Amrish said, he said to take a control. See, it is not so easy to go when there is, the womb is there or the pregnant, the uterus is there, mobilizing the internal iliac artery.
Should I say that we've evolved an algorithm for this? What we do is, because we're called in, you wouldn't know how frequently we're called in for this. What we do is we allow the patient to do the gynecologist to do a hysterotomy, deliver the baby, clamp the placenta, divide the placenta, but not extract the placenta. Deliver the uterus out of the incision. Believe me, it takes not more than a minute to find and put a sling around the internal iliacs. It's actually a minute's job. Absolutely. So I wouldn't. And the one is open. It's
even
not.
We have done this thing, unless if it is called for an emergency, it will be a mess. But if it is planned and all, probably you can get it.
important is, as Dr. Ambarish told, the venous bleeding. So in spite of taking the internal iliac balloon or even if sometimes taking a clamp also, the venous bleed to control is very difficult. So we have to prepare for everything. We have to counsel the patient. Recently, one patient, similarly, we occluded the right through the right. Then the right leg got to critical ischemia because we could not give the heparin or the enoxaparin. So I had to do thromboembolectomy. And ultimately, patient lost the uterus because of the bleeding was so high. So venous bleed is very important. We have to keep in the mind, and we have to explain gynecologist and as well as the patient.
Rajarajan sir, what is the size of the balloon and length of the balloon used for internal iliac artery occlusion?
That was actually 6 mm, into 20.
Thank you, sir.
So, any other questions? I think the moderators are there. Dhanesh is going. So, Manish bhai, you are the one I think who's handling.
Yes, sir. Like, no, this is something very close to our heart, TAPCON, and Bedi sir is like a flagship of TAPCON. He has attended all the TAPCONs. However, the situations, the poor hospitality and everything, but TAPCON has always been a hit, and that is because of the legends like you, sir. And I really appreciate everybody participating and sending their cases. We intend to continue this the moment things normalize, and we will host it at a place where everybody would remember. Once again, I thank all the participants and Dr.
And
Bedi
Manish
sir.
bhai, just to share that there were almost 90 plus participants during the course of the meeting, which is really amazing.
Your doing, sir. This is your doing.
No, it's not my doing. It is all the flagship of TAPCON which is there, and also you guys have put in a lot of effort, and that's what we decided, that every month. Last week we will have a complications meeting. So next month we will have the one which will be moderated by Dr. Girish, because he used to conduct his TAPCON. He used to do his complications meeting, and the following month after that you will again be back again with TAPCON. So every month end we plan to discuss complications. And probably one monthly, workshop or boot camp also. And like we are having it tomorrow, again, a great session tomorrow we expect. So thank you so much. I think it's been a pleasure having you on board, Manish bhai and Team Gujarat. I think you've done wonderfully well. I think some excellent cases by everyone out here. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Have a great day and see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a